Alright, so in this video, I'm going to be going through our process that we follow for all our clients in creating extremely custom, unique email flows for each SaaS specifically. So I'm not going to be going over any email flows in this one, but I'm going to be going over the process you can follow for creating your own email flows that only your SaaS company has, that no other company in the world has, essentially. And kind of our process to doing that. And of course, as a disclaimer, all SaaS companies should be utilizing the core email flow, such as welcome flow, onboarding flow, no login, referral. But after you've got all of these in place and after you've got the core flows in place, I've got other videos kind of going through the core flows. So feel free to check them out if you haven't got them in place yet. But after you have these in place, what's next? Well, once you have all of these types of flows in place, I'm going to be going over how you can actually create your custom flows. So there's a process that we follow, a specific step-by-step method to being able to create these flows, and they're actually incredibly effective because they're not generic. Customers have never seen them before. The emails they're receiving from you are super, super personalized and specific. And obviously people resonate with specific personalized emails, right? So again, once you have the core flows down and they're working properly, then it's often worth it to try and experiment with your own custom flows. Here's the process that we follow. So the first step is to identify gaps in the customer journey that you can fill. So kind of after you go and you look at your whole customer journey from the moment someone comes onto your website, then obviously they're converted onto the free trial, they're activated through the free trial, they're converted onto a plan, they onboard throughout the plan, they make sure they're using the core features, they get the benefits, they're retained, and they refer customers. And then they stay with you for a long time. So that's a really, really rough overview of kind of the customer journey. But you need to look through that customer journey and think, okay, which parts of it are we not kind of targeting, or is there potential to have more targeting? Is there a way to actually improve activation here? Oh, activation of customers on the tier 3 plan isn't as high as activation on tier 2 and tier 1. So maybe there's potential to have a custom flow here that can increase its activation. That's kind of the thought process you should be looking at here. Try to look at metrics, see where something might look slightly off or even something can be improved potentially, and then you can try and go through this process and create a custom email flow to correct that situation. So the second thing is that once you identify the gap and also the fix that you want to make, maybe is to increase the activation on the tier 3 plan, for example, you need to identify which variable of revenue does this increase. So we obviously have the number of paying customers, we have the monthly retention of customers, and we also have the average revenue per customer, or ARPU. Try to identify which of these 3 variables does it actually increase, so then you can go ahead and track the email flow to see how well it performs and iterate from there. The third step would be to identify the goal of the flow. So this is the exact output that we're optimizing for. So let's say in terms of activation rate for tier 3 subscribers, let's get even more specific here. So it might be how many customers are activated after 2 months on this specific feature in the tier 3 plan, because you identify that people who use this specific feature have a higher retention rate. So based off that, you want to activate more people onto that specific feature. And then you have a specific output that you're optimizing for, and then you can iterate all of your inputs for that output. If you don't even know what you're optimizing for, then you're not going to be able to improve your flows, obviously. So identify the flow, identify the goal of the flow, and then what's the actual structure of the flow that you think initially would be able to optimize for that output. For example, off the top of my head, for the tier 3 plan with the specific feature that you want to optimize for, what's the best structure? Well, maybe it's best in the beginning of the flow to actually get them to use feature A and B before you push them to feature X, because feature X is reliant on the customer having good results with feature A and B, right? So maybe that's a realization you make, and based off that, you decide on a structure of the flow where first you make sure they're using feature A and B, and once you've identified that, then you go ahead and try to push them towards using feature X. That's just a quick example off the top of my head. Maybe it'll definitely will be different for you, but make sure you try and identify the accurate structure, because the structure matters just as much as the copy of the actual flow itself. So once we have this down, we need to identify the specific trigger for all of the email flows and the time delay. So when does this flow actually get triggered? So for example, it might be that after month 1, if they haven't used feature X at all, then this flow might get triggered. So that might be the trigger for your email flow. And all the time delays, it might be, well, you tell them to use, or you make sure they're using feature A and B. You wait 2 to 3 days, you offer support on feature A and B, and again, check the data to make sure they're using it. You can obviously set this up all automated, all flows will be automated within your email sending platform. And then maybe you wait another week, for example, to make sure that you're giving them as much time as possible to use feature X. And if they still haven't used it, then you can go ahead and push them towards using it to try and make sure you're not being pushy or overbearing, but you're only specifically using this flow and using it for customers who aren't activated with a specific feature. The fifth step is obviously to create the flow based on the structure you identified, the triggers you identified, and of course, the fifth step would be to create and implement the flows and monitor the results. Creating the flow based on the structure of the flow that you identified would be best, the trigger of the flow, and all of the time delays. And then just identifying what the results look like, how can we improve it, what can we test, and having that process of constant iteration, optimizing for the outcome, the output which you have already identified. And just a quick example of how you can use this. Like I mentioned, I just went over a completely different example, but you identify your customers aren't using full advantage of one of your features since it's a bit more complicated. Activating users on this feature would increase retention and customer results. The goal is to increase the percentage of users using feature X. The trigger of the flow is that the user has used 200 credits of feature Y after onboarding, since knowing how to use feature Y is required for them to use feature X, like the example I just went over. And then you create the copy, incentivize the usage, set the flow up, and optimize it. Following this framework has allowed us to create extremely specific flows for our clients that are custom for each SaaS. And this allows us to make sure that we essentially guarantee that competitors aren't using the same flows as you, and it gives you an easy leg up on competitors, because the chances are that if they have the kind of same retention, same activation rates as you on certain features, and by implementing these, you can get that leg up, that slight increase in the metrics, which can be incredibly beneficial in the long term. So hopefully this was helpful for you. If you would like to see how we can implement these flows for you and the core flows and optimize it, we're a full stack kind of A to Z email marketing agency who exclusively work with SaaS companies, then feel free to check out below. I've added some information you can reach out to me from, but hopefully this was helpful regardless. Thanks.